horror fans, welcome back to Room 237, and I'm back with another review. Now, this is of a film that I picked up fairly recently. It was one that I've kind of been curious about, never really knew what it was about, but I had seen the cover, I had seen the title and heard the title all over the place. In fact, I think fairly recently, it went to Shudder or something, because I remember seeing it like all over Facebook. It was kind of everywhere. I was like, this looks like something from the 80s. And then that's really what sold it. But it is 2016's Beyond the Gates. Of course, this is the Scream Factory release, put out by IFC Midnight. So, as I was saying, what really sold me on this, I should say, is that this is, or what it's intended to be, is an 80s throwback. A la It Follows or Terrifier's more 70s, but like those kind of movies. It's not like, say, Hatchet or Gutterballs, where it's just like, hey, this is going to be a slasher like the 80s. Like, this goes for aesthetic. It has a great 80s score. It does kind of just play off of very base level nostalgia or 80s retro, like VHS or board games, which is the whole point of the movie. Even just like the color scheme and atmosphere looks like it has it. And I love movies like that. I love movies like It Follows. That really does feel like it made by someone who genuinely loves 80s horror. Terrifier, someone who genuinely loves the 70s grindhouse, like video nasty slasher. I'll even give credit to All the Boys Love Mandy Lane, because that has this gritty, again, 70s sort of drive-in aesthetic, feel, everything. This, I mean, there's even some posters, like some posters have that Beyond the Gates font. Some have Beyond the Gates where the letters are just outlined, whether it be like this or straight across. Looks just like Stranger Things. Which I still haven't seen Stranger Things, I know, but from what I hear, that's very good at the whole having a lot of nostalgia for the 80s. This, though, really, apart from the scenes that have the game and the score, it doesn't really have a lot going for it other than that. I mean, as far as the 80s stuff go. I mean, the performances were fine. The idea is really awesome. It's definitely something that, you know, you can definitely work with. But they didn't really use it to its fullest potential. And also, I mean, you got Barbara Crampton as, like, the host of this game, this VCR game, which was something I never played, but I do remember going to the video store when there was VHS. I know a lot of people will comment, I've got toothbrushes older than you. I'm older than you think, and I do remember video stores with VHS. It's one of, if not my fondest memory of my childhood. That's like no longer a thing. So Beyond the Gates, it was directed by Jackson Stewart. Which before this, and even since, he's only directed one episode of Supernatural. Stars Graham Skipper, Chase Williamson, and Bree Grant. Then, of course, Barbara Crampton. And, I mean, again, even with the cover and having Barbara Crampton, it looks like, or it should be like a Stuart Gordon or Brian Yuzna kind of like Lovecraft adaptation, or a loose adaptation, like what they did in the 80s. Even this, I get vibes from, like, From Beyond, which was a Lovecraft film by either Gordon or Yuzna. I can't remember now. Has Barbara Crampton. course, my favorite movie she was in was Reanimator. But and the score is very much it's all synth. It's got it's a very synth score, but the way it's done with some of the other instrumental bits, it actually sounds a lot like an Italian horror film from the 80s, which is a huge compliment. It's got very goblin-esque sound, so that's awesome. Graham Skipper plays Gordon, and Chase Williamson is his younger brother John. They're kind of estranged. Their father ran this sort of this local mom and pop video rental place, but he went missing 7 months ago. John stayed in the hometown. Gordon came back, and they decided to pack up the store and close it up, pack it in, kind of get rid of everything, move on. And then Gordon's girlfriend, played by Bree Grant, who was in season 6 of Dexter. She was one of, I'm not calling her Laurie Strode, but Scout Taylor Compton's friends and Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. Margot is her name. And they find this, while they're in the VHS store, just the two brothers, the rental store, which did bring back a lot of memories. This does have some nostalgic value. It really does. As minimal as it might be. And even the opening credits, you got the synth score with like the inside of a VCR and how it works. I know Mike OCP Communications went on a long tangent about how it feels disingenuine, like like what hipster thinks is retro and nostalgic. I totally get where he's coming from with that, but there are some things that really do kind of make me go, okay, good job on how to get like an 80s feel and look across. But they never found, there's a part where they talk about how they've never been in the dad's office. John is staying with this, sort of greaser drifter. Looks more like if Rob Zombie was to do a greaser, because he's, I don't know. Gordon's staying at the dad's house. He finds the key. They go in the office. They find this board game, VHS VCR board game, which when they put it in, because it was in the VCR, ejected, kind of like, oh, I guess this is the last thing Dad watched. Barbara Crampton is the host. Decides to give it to the brother, the younger brother John. John comes over for dinner that night. They all decide to play it. She mentions, the only way to save your father's soul. So then that's when they decide to play it. It's been compared to, and it was sold on the idea that it was going to be a, like an 80s horror version of Jumanji, R-rated Jumanji. It is, but very minimal. I mean, the movie is only 82 minutes. Wikipedia says 84, but and this is the not rated version, so, but like 45 minutes in, half the time is when they actually start playing the game, and then for half the time for the rest of the movie is when they played the game. There's not a lot of it there. When it is there, it's nice. When it is there, it's like, okay, this is kind of cool, but it's a very short game. You have to find 4 keys. There's like 4 tasks, and then it's over. And I mean, it's not a very long game. And then like as soon as she says like save your father's soul, they immediately don't, like they immediately assume, oh my god, the game sucked him in. Like this is connected to Dad. The only other characters we're introduced to is the drifter guy and this childhood friend who's now a police officer. So they call the officer friend. They say, hey, they found this creepy tape, might have something to do with Dad's disappearance. He can't see Barbara Crampton on the screen. We don't know that. We just get it from him saying it. Like, it doesn't show his point of view. The thing about this movie is that the stakes are very low, kind of, and the tasks are very easy. It's not like Would You Rather or 13 Sins. I thought it was going to be like Jumanji mixed with 13 Sins. And Heather Wixson from Daily Dead says, glorious, over the top, and blood drenched. I will say, when there is blood on the screen, yeah, it's bloody. It's awesome. But there's really 4 scenes, really. And, you know, like with 13 Sins, you have to do this really bad shit. But with here, it's like, you're not really doing really anything bad. There's like reasons to do it. Like their first task, they have to like obtain this dagger from the store that the dad got the game at, which is supposed to be this kind of I don't know, like a Needful Things type place, like a horror themed with this sort of let's see if I can get the guy's name that played him. He reminded me of like a character that Roddy McDowall would have played if this was back in the 80s. Character's name was Elric. Jesse Merlin was the guy that played Elric. And yeah, he reminded, kind of like if Roddy McDowall from Fright Night had this horror-themed store that was kind of like a Needful Things, and he was sort of like the phantom store owner. And he's very cryptic, but they're able to get this dagger from the store. And the game tells them there's this thing they have to find outside the backyard, according to the board, because there's the clues. The X tells them where to go. They dig up this voodoo doll, and they feel something hard in there, like a key. So John starts cutting up the voodoo doll, which we see his friend Hank at the bar being rough with his ex-girlfriend. But when they start cutting up the voodoo doll, the doll itself starts bleeding, and of course he's, you know, convulsing and, you know, pretty much being ripped apart. His intestines are flying out of him. It's a very short sequence. It's not that long. But, I mean, the effects look good. There wasn't too much CGI. I would say maybe with the second key task, and of course the optical effects with the, you know, the glowing purple lights. And when this stuff is on screen, it looks great. And when you have the 80s synth, which really isn't much in the movie at all up until like the very ending, okay, that's when you have like a good 80s throwback. I do agree with Mike OCP Communications that this feels like someone who's like, okay, board games, VHS, they'll make a movie about that, it'll be nostalgic. And then maybe someone said, hey, you know what would really make it cool is about like a synth score. I mean, they really could have done a lot with the whole VHS aspect. I mean, there's even a part where the brothers are kind of looking through VHS tapes, and there's one called Blood Messiah. Not a real movie, or at least not in this context. He's like, hey, you remember this one? He's like, oh yeah, that has the castration scene with this. Yeah, classic. It's a video nasty. Okay, that was cool. And like John is like the wrong side of the tracks kind of brother, and Gordon is like the sort of impish nerd. But like the second task, because they have like these 4 tarot cards of characters, you know, like the greaser friend was the drifter. Then you have the nobleman, the maiden, the father. And so then Barbara Crampton comes back on, and Barbara Crampton does give a good performance as this horror game host. And she was like, the nobleman who will now be possessed by our ways, you must obtain the key from him. So it's the cop who's possessed. He's got a rifle. They have this little clay bust with a pin in the head. They can't seem to get the cop to snap out of it. He's trying to attack him. I mean, it's out in broad daylight in suburbia. They pull the pin and the front of his face fucking explodes. Blood everywhere. And I mean, it's like the thick, chunky soup kind of blood, too. I mean, maybe a little bit of CGI there, but okay, another decent scene. You do have some unneeded stuff, like the whole subplot of how Margot had nightmares since she broke her wrist. She's been prescribed Ambien, but now she sleepwalks. Okay. Then we get this long exposition dump, like right before the third act, where it's just Margot and John. And John's explaining their past with an alcoholic father, what it was like with him, how it got worse, how Gordon left, town, John was left behind. And then Margot says, well, Gordon was a drinker when we first met. And, pretty much tells the story about how earlier when she said she broke her wrist because she was hesitant to say she fell. That's when she said he had a little too much to drink one night, got an argument, pulled my wrist too hard. He was mortified. He quit right then. And she kind of tells the story similar to how Shelley Duvall tells the story of Danny's arm in The Shining. But, then the maiden Margot gets possessed. And then to get the final key, they're allowed access to Beyond the Gate, which is just this gate down in their cellar. Which, I mean, there are a couple good scare scenes, like Gordon sees the vision of this one, like, long-haired demon a couple times. And then right before they're allowed access into the gate, this hand comes out and grabs John. But he's able to get away. And then the long-haired demon, which the makeup looks decent, but the movie's very dark. So it kind of makes it look like a zombie from Day of the Dead Bloodline or something. And whenever there's a threat like this, him or the cop or what's going to come later, they go down very easily. I mean, he gets stabbed a couple times, gets hit with a bat, nothing, hit with the bat, goes down. I mean, baseball bat, head into Hamburg. But then they're allowed in the gates. And if they can pull the poison heart from the father's soul will be freed along with everyone else that was in there. So we see the dad, the cop, the drifter friend, the long-haired demon. They defeat them all. John gets, slashed, but he lives. The dad, has like the flannel shirt and is doing like the, why don't you try that with your old man? Kind of, the intimidating alcoholic dad. But they pull the heart out. Everything's granted. The father's soul is saved. Our three leads are fine. And then it ends with another guy going into the shop, asking the shop owner if he has anything from the 80s, asks if he likes anything, or if he likes board games, and it's Beyond the Gates. Which really does nothing because maybe I missed something, but it didn't really imply that they destroyed the game or they locked it away to where no one could get it. If they had done that and then showed that, the store owner still has it, or if they implied it was the only one, then it could have been like a bit more of like a eerie ending that it will still continue. But it didn't do anything like that, so it could just be, yeah, a ton of these were made. But supposedly Jackson Stewart is, as of 2016, working on a sequel with Brian Usna, which, thank Christ, because that's what this movie needed. It needed a Stuart Gordon or a Brian Usna. It needed that 80s Lovecraft director, kind of flair. Because the short, do you hear that? The short scenes we have of the actual horror, because it really is like 25% horror, the rest is family issues. Like I really like the look of the board game. I like the idea it's a VCR board game. Like, cool. I haven't seen anything with VHS, VCR since I was a kid. There's the nostalgia. I really like Barbara Crampton as the host of this game, as the instructor of this game. Everything dealing with the game looks cool. Like when we have the blue and purple lights in the fog coming from the gate. That all looks great. The synth score, excellent. Again, it sounds like not just 80s horror, but Italian, specifically Goblin. So that's really good. When there is, blood or guts, yeah, there's a lot of it, but there's very few scenes sprinkled throughout. And so, the first 45 minutes is just these brotherly family issues. And then for the next 40 to 45 minutes or so, like 40 minutes basically, the last 40 minutes, there's like maybe 20 minutes of actual game horror stuff. So the things I like, when they're there, they're excellent. And there's a way that you can build on that. But there's just so much bland other stuff that just really bogs down the movie. And, Stuart Gordon passed away recently, but Brian Usna, excellent. Even apart from his Lovecraft stuff, you get something like Society, which was awesome. I'm not saying it has to be that gross or gory, but, you can really give this movie a look, and, you can really let it live up to the trailers and the posters. I didn't hate this movie. I really didn't. There was enough to where I wanted to see what was going on. But in the end, I was disappointed just with it didn't live up to... I kind of thought we were really going to be immersed in this world for the entirety for at least most of the movie. Like Jumanji, at first it's just animals coming out. And then before you know it, the whole house is a jungle. Then it falls apart. And then the city's, getting all shitty because of stampedes. It's all pretty much limited to the house. And the house doesn't even really change. You go down to a gate in the cellar, walk through it, and then you're just in their world, which is just the cellar with fog and purple lights. But for a $300,000 budget, it looks excellent. It really does look good, which is even more frustrating. It looks great for... that's cheap. Especially nowadays, that's cheap. And it does look like they spent it wisely, but there's just not enough of... I don't know if you can see these, but all these little, like, zombies or, Evil Dead possessed people in the back. You don't get a lot of those. Again, the tasks seem really easy. The threats don't really seem to be that harsh. So it seems like a pretty somewhat easier thing to do. I thought it was going to be more like 13 Sins when you really got to challenge your morals and have really dire consequences. Like, yes, he could lose his father's and girlfriend's soul, but, the tasks seem fairly easy. So, I don't know if this would be a rant. Yeah, it sounded like I was ranting. It's mostly family stuff, just family complications, exposition about alcoholism and abuse, and, staying with family versus splitting from your family. They keep going back and forth between, I don't want to play this anymore, let's just stop, this is getting too creepy, I'm uncomfortable, to the next scene, just waking up in the middle of the night and then going back down to play it. The whole thing with the girl having, Margot having nightmares from Ambien and sleepwalking, that doesn't really go anywhere. But I really can't praise enough, when we do get this kind of purple light, from beyond kind of aesthetic with the excellent 80s score, which is up there with the score from It Follows. I think it was that good. It's just not in there enough. But the parts the score was in, yeah, it was really effective. The performances were there. It was enough to where I wouldn't call it cheesy or cringy or unwatchable or even believable, but, it was there. Except for Barbara Crampton, I thought she was really good. I know it's been 5 years, but if we do get a sequel, well, okay, 4 years, because I know 2020 didn't really exist. But normally I say, hey, it was perfect, leave it alone, or hey, it was shitty, just cut your losses and go do something else. But with this one was so close. And it would be easy. I mean, it's a VCR board games. Another group of friends or whatever could find it and play it. It's a concept that can work very well, and this was so frustratingly missed that if you're getting someone like Brian Usna behind it or involved with it, then yeah, it deserves another shot. This is one that was, you were almost there. We got someone in that can really make this what it deserves to be. Sure, try again. So it's not the, you can really tell it was made by a fan of 80s horror like It Follows or Terrifier. I would put this more in the realm of, again, not like Hatchet or Gutterballs, because that's more just, okay, here's a slasher film done, kind of like that. It's not as bad as Blumhouse's Slasher. It is better than that, but I don't know. I liked it enough to not really say that it was a complete failure. It failed to live up to the expectations or the promises it seemed to be making. And, if someone like Brian Usna wasn't involved in the, supposed sequel, I would say hopefully they learn from their mistakes this time around. But if Brian Usna's behind it, maybe we can get a, from beyond, more of a spectacle film. But anyway, almost half hour, so that's 2016's Beyond the Gates. Score, excellent, loved it. It sounded just like a Goblin score, or at least 80s Italian horror. When there was blood, it was practical. It was aplenty, but the scenes were not. Very minimal CGI, so that's a plus. The sort of optical or lighting effects, like the purple and the blues, that was excellent. That had a great atmosphere and aesthetic when we actually saw it. Barbara Crampton was awesome. It was great to see her, especially in this kind of role. Unfortunately, everything I liked about it was very underused. But that's 2016's Beyond the Gates. And thank you for watching.